A dying puppy hugs its owner before being euthanized, but the vet noticed something strange in its eyes. What was supposed to be a final goodbye turns into a chilling discovery no one saw coming. A woman who's lost everything clings to the only living thing that ever loved her back. And just when she's about to let go, the vet stops cold, because this puppy isn't dying by accident. There's something hidden beneath the surface, something that powerful people would do anything to keep buried. Poison, fear, and a truth that could destroy lives begin to unravel, starting with one small heartbeat fighting to stay alive. Why was this dog targeted? Who wanted it gone? And when the truth finally comes out, will it save them or cost them everything? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The fluorescent lights of the small-town animal clinic buzzed overhead as Nell Bishop burst through the glass doors, her arms trembling as she cradled Button's limp body. The tiny brown mutt, usually so full of life, lay still against her chest, his mismatched ears drooping. "Please, someone help!" Nell's voice cracked with desperation. Her work uniform from the motel was still on, the blue polyester damp with sweat from her rush to the clinic. "My dog, he just collapsed. He won't wake up." Dr. Rowan Keene emerged from an exam room, his rolled-up sleeves revealing strong forearms marked with old scratches from years of treating animals. His tired gray eyes took in the scene quickly, professional calm masking the concern that flickered across his face. "Bring him here," he said, gesturing to the nearest exam room. "When did this start?" Nell followed him, her worn sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor. "I found him like this when I got home from work. He was fine this morning, eating, playing." Her voice hitched. "But now he's barely breathing." Rowan gently took Button from her arms and placed him on the steel exam table. The small dog's chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. His usually bright eyes were barely open, showing only a sliver of white. "How long have you had him?" Rowan asked, checking Button's vital signs with practiced movements. 3 months. Nell wrapped her arms around herself, watching every move the vet made. "Found him abandoned near the fairgrounds. He was skinny and scared, but so sweet. He's all I have." Rowan's expression grew grave as he completed his examination. He turned to the cabinet where he kept the euthanasia drugs, his shoulders heavy with the weight of what he had to say. "Miss Bishop." "Nell," she corrected automatically, her voice barely a whisper. "Nell." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Button's condition is severe. His organs are shutting down. The kindest thing might be to—" "No!" Nell stepped forward, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please, there has to be something you can do. He's just a puppy." As if hearing her distress, Button stirred. With tremendous effort, the little dog lifted his head and reached his paws toward Nell. She rushed to him, and he wrapped his paws around her neck in a trembling embrace that felt like a goodbye. His scarred paw pressed against her skin as he nuzzled weakly into her hair. Rowan had seen many animals pass, but something about this moment made him pause. He looked closer at Button's gums, noticing an unusual indigo tinge. Leaning in, he gently pulled back one of the dog's eyelids. The pupil was pinpoint small, constricted despite the dim lighting of the exam room. His stomach tightened as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't natural illness or age. This was deliberate. "Wait." He pulled his hand back from the cabinet. "This isn't right." Nell looked up, her face tear-stained. "What do you mean?" "These symptoms." Rowan grabbed his penlight, checking Button's eyes again. The discoloration of his gums, his constricted pupils, the rapid onset of symptoms. This isn't disease. Button's been poisoned. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Nell's face drained of color as she processed what he was saying. Poisoned? Her voice shook. Someone tried to kill my dog? Rowan was already moving, pulling supplies from cabinets with urgent purpose. We need to act fast. I can try to counteract it, but we have to move quickly. He grabbed activated charcoal, IV fluids, and various medications, explaining as he worked. The indigo staining suggests rat poison, but this is stronger than typical commercial products. Someone knew what they were doing. Nell stayed close to Button, stroking his fur as Rowan inserted an IV line and began treatment. Her mind raced through possibilities, trying to understand who would want to hurt her gentle, loving puppy. Will he survive? She asked, watching the fluids drip steadily into Button's vein. Rowan's face was set with determination as he administered the medications. The next 24 hours will be critical, but now that we know what we're dealing with, he has a fighting chance. Button whimpered softly, and Nell bent to kiss his head. Fight, sweet boy, she whispered. Please fight. The reality of the situation settled over them both. This wasn't just about saving one dog's life anymore. Someone in their small town was deliberately harming animals, and Button's suffering had exposed a darker truth that neither of them could ignore. As Rowan continued his treatment, his mind was already turning over the implications. In his 15 years as a veterinarian, he'd seen accidents and neglect. But this level of calculated cruelty was different. It would take more than medicine to solve this mystery and prevent it from happening again. Nell remained by Button's side, her hand never leaving his fur. Her quiet grief had transformed into something stronger, a determination that matched the steel in Rowan's eyes. Someone had tried to take away the one bright spot in her life, the loving creature who waited for her every day after long hours of cleaning rooms at the motel. Someone had looked at her sweet, trusting puppy and decided to end his life. The buzzing fluorescent lights continued their steady hum as dog and humans settled in for a long night of waiting, healing, and unspoken questions about who in their small town was capable of such deliberate cruelty. Rowan worked methodically, his experienced hands moving with practiced efficiency as he administered treatments to stabilize Button. The little dog's breathing had steadied somewhat, though his condition remained critical. After 2 hours of intensive care, Rowan finally stepped back from the examination table, running a hand through his graying hair. He's responding to treatment, he told Nell, who hadn't left Button's side. The activated charcoal is helping absorb the remaining toxin, and the IV fluids are supporting his organs. But there's something unusual about this poisoning. Nell looked up, her hand still gentle on Button's fur. What do you mean? Rowan picked up a small, ultraviolet light from his workbench. When he shone it on Button's gums, they glowed with an eerie blue-green tinge. See this? It's a tracking dye, commonly added to commercial-grade agricultural toxins. But this particular combination, the dye pattern and the severity of symptoms, suggests something far more potent than what you'd find at the local hardware store. You mean someone used farm poison? Nell's voice trembled with anger. Not just any farm poison. This is restricted use stuff, carefully regulated. You need special licensing to purchase it. Rowan's gray eyes were troubled. This wasn't some accident, Nell. Someone deliberately used a professional-grade toxin. Nell's mind raced back to the day she'd found Button, just 3 months ago. The fairgrounds, she whispered. I found him wandering near the county fairgrounds, behind the livestock pavilion. He was so skinny and scared. That area's had a lot of development lately, Rowan noted. The new industrial park going in. I need to report this. Nell stood up straight, her exhaustion temporarily forgotten. Someone's hurting animals on purpose. They need to be stopped. Despite Rowan's gentle warning about waiting until morning, Nell insisted on going straight to the animal control office. The afternoon sun was harsh as she pulled into the gravel parking lot, determination carrying her through the door despite her fatigue. Harold Vance barely looked up from his computer when she entered his office. His uniform shirt strained against his bulk as he leaned back in his chair, regarding her with obvious impatience. "My dog was poisoned," Nell stated firmly. "Dr. Keene found evidence of restricted agricultural toxins. Someone's deliberately hurting animals near the fairgrounds." Vance's expression didn't change. "And this dog, it's registered? Licensed? Up to date on shots?" I was working on that," Nell admitted. "But that's not the point. Someone's using illegal poison." "Look, Ms. Bishop," Vance cut her off, his tone dismissive. "We get dozens of strays around here. They get into things. They cause problems. That's why we have leash laws and registration requirements." He shuffled some papers on his desk. "Your dog's just another stray that got into something it shouldn't have." "Button is not just another stray," Nell's voice rose. "Dr. Keene found proof of restricted toxins. Dr. Keene should stick to giving shots and cutting cats," Vance interrupted. "If you want to file a formal complaint, you'll need to provide proof of ownership, vaccination records, and registration." He turned back to his computer. "Otherwise, I suggest you let us handle the disposal of the animal." "Disposal?" Nell stepped back, horrified. "He's not dead. Dr. Keene is treating him." Vance's eyes narrowed slightly. "Most folks can't afford extensive vet care for a stray. Euthanasia is usually the humane option." "No." Nell's voice was firm. "Button's staying at the clinic. He's fighting, and we're fighting for him." She turned and walked out, Vance's cold stare following her departure. Back at the clinic, Rowan had converted a kennel into a comfortable recovery space for Button, complete with monitoring equipment and a soft bed. He refused to discuss euthanasia, instead showing Nell how to check the IV lines and monitor Button's breathing. "I'll stay with him tonight," Rowan assured her. "You need rest. Come back in the morning." Nell reluctantly agreed, though leaving Button was one of the hardest things she'd ever done. She pressed a gentle kiss to his head, whispered promises to return, and finally headed home to her small apartment above the motel where she worked. The night settled over the clinic as Rowan finished his rounds. The other animals were settled, and Button's vital signs had stabilized enough that Rowan felt comfortable taking a brief break. He headed out to his truck to grab his dinner from the cooler he kept there. The parking lot was dark, the security light casting deep shadows. As Rowan approached his vehicle, something white caught his eye. A piece of paper tucked under his windshield wiper. Thinking it was probably a flyer, he pulled it free. The message was typed in plain black letters. "Put the mutt down. Stay out." Rowan's hand tightened on the paper, crinkling it slightly. The threat was clear. Someone didn't want Button to survive. Someone didn't want questions asked about the poison or its source. Someone with enough power and connection to know exactly what was happening at the clinic. He looked around the empty parking lot, but there was nothing to see except shadows and the gentle swaying of trees in the night breeze. Carefully folding the note, he slipped it into his pocket. His jaw set with determination as he headed back inside to check on his patient. Button lifted his head slightly as Rowan entered, offering a weak thump of his tail. The sight strengthened Rowan's resolve. Someone powerful might want this truth buried, but as long as this brave little dog kept fighting, Rowan would fight alongside him, and Nell. The monitoring equipment beeped steadily in the quiet clinic, marking each moment that Button continued to survive, each moment that brought them closer to uncovering who was behind this deliberate act of cruelty. The night stretched ahead, full of questions without answers. But one thing was certain. This was no random act of malice. Someone had a secret worth killing for, and Button's survival threatened to expose it all. The morning sun cast long shadows through the clinic windows as Rowan hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of patient files. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, forgotten as he pieced together a disturbing pattern. "Look at this," he said as Nell entered, pointing to a map he'd marked with red dots. "Each dot represents a dog poisoning reported in the last 6 months. Notice anything?" Nell leaned closer, her brow furrowing. "They're all clustered in the same area." "Exactly, all within a mile radius of the old Miller farm property." Rowan pulled out several case files. 8 dogs, all showing the same symptoms as Button: constricted pupils, blue-stained gums, respiratory distress. Most died before anyone could get them help. 8? Nell's voice cracked. She sank into the chair beside his desk, her face pale. "Why hasn't anyone connected this before?" "Because they were reported as separate incidents. Strays, mostly, like Vance said. Just another stray getting into something." Rowan's voice held barely contained anger. "But this is no accident. The toxin we found in Button's system is restricted. You need special permits to purchase it." He pulled up a local news article on his computer. "And guess who just bought up all that land where the poisonings occurred? Durney Development Corporation." "Caleb Durney?" Nell straightened. "The feed supplier?" "And county commissioner," Rowan added grimly. "He's planning to build some kind of exclusive hunting lodge. The project's been in the works for months, but they've had trouble getting some of the longtime residents to sell." Nell's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "The poisonings? They're trying to force people out? Kill their pets to make them leave?" "It fits the pattern." Rowan spread out more documents. "Every poisoning coincides with property negotiations. People are more likely to sell if their animals keep dying mysteriously." "That's horrible." Nell's hands clenched. "We have to stop them." "It won't be easy. Durney's got connections throughout the county. Money talks, and he's got plenty of it." Rowan ran a hand through his hair, looking tired. "That's probably why Vance was so quick to dismiss your concerns." "I don't care how powerful he is," Nell said firmly. "He can't just kill innocent animals to get what he wants." Rowan studied her face, seeing the same determination that had brought her to his clinic with Button. "You know this could get dangerous? People like Durney don't like their plans being disrupted." "I've already gotten a threat," he added, pulling out the note from his pocket. "Someone wants us to back off." Nell read the note, her jaw set. "All the more reason not to. These animals can't defend themselves. Someone has to speak for them." Rowan nodded slowly. "We'll need proof. Hard evidence that links the toxin to Durney's operation." "I can help," Nell offered. "I know most of the families in that area from my work at the motel. They might talk to me, tell me if they've had similar problems. And I can pull records of who's licensed to handle these kinds of restricted chemicals." Rowan began making notes. "We'll need to be careful, though. Document everything. Take photos. Build a case that can't be ignored or buried." They spent the next hour planning their investigation, Rowan's methodical approach complementing Nell's knowledge of the community. Despite their different backgrounds, they found themselves working seamlessly together, united by their shared sense of justice. "We should check on Button," Nell said finally, glancing at the clock. They walked to the recovery kennel where Button lay. The puppy's tail wagged weakly at their approach, his eyes brighter than the day before. Nell knelt beside him, gently stroking his head. "He's getting stronger," Rowan observed, checking the monitors. "His breathing's better, and his blood work is showing improvement." "You hear that, buddy?" Nell whispered to Button. "You keep fighting. We're going to make sure this doesn't happen to any other dogs." Rowan watched them together, seeing the bond that had formed between the wounded pup and the determined woman. It stirred something in him, memories of his own dog from years ago, before his wife's death had left him focusing solely on work. We'll need to be careful, he said again. Gurney's not just wealthy. He's smart. He's built his reputation as a pillar of the community, always supporting local causes, showing up at charity events. Sometimes the worst crimes hide behind the nicest smiles, Nell replied, her voice hardening. My daddy used to say that. Your father sounds wise. He was. Nell stood up, her expression resolute. He also taught me that doing what's right isn't always easy, but it's always necessary. Rowan nodded, respect growing for this woman who worked as a housekeeper, but carried herself with such quiet dignity and conviction. Her compassion might have brought Button to his clinic, but it was her strength that made him believe they actually had a chance against someone like Gurney. I'll start with the chemical supply records, he said. See who's been buying these toxins legally, and who might be helping distribute them off the books. And I'll talk to Mrs. Henderson first, Nell added. She lost her beagle 3 months ago. Never did believe it was just an accident. They exchanged contact information and agreed to meet again the next day. As Nell left for her afternoon shift at the motel, Rowan watched her go, thinking how this unlikely partnership had formed from a single act of cruelty meant to silence opposition. But instead of silence, that act had created a voice. 2 voices, actually, joining together to speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Whether they succeeded or failed, at least they were trying. Sometimes that was the most important part of any fight, simply refusing to look away when others said nothing could be done. Turning back to his files, Rowan began the painstaking work of building their case. While in his kennel, Button slept peacefully, unaware that his struggle for survival had sparked something much larger than himself. Nell clutched a worn piece of paper with Chet Ralston's address as she and Rowan pulled up to the small house on Cedar Street. The yard was neat but spare, with a single empty doghouse standing like a lonely sentinel near the back fence. You sure about this? Rowan asked, putting his truck in park. He lost his beagle 2 weeks ago, Nell said. Same area as Button was found. If anyone might help us, it's him. They walked up to the porch where a man in his early 60s sat in a wooden rocker, a pocket radio crackling beside him. His weathered face tightened at their approach. Mr. Ralston? Nell stepped forward. I'm Nell Bishop. We met at the motel last month when you were looking for Scout. Chet's fingers curled around the arms of his rocker. Found him, dead by the creek. His voice was gruff with pain. If you're collecting for the shelter, I'm not interested. We're not from the shelter, Rowan said, introducing himself. We're investigating dog poisonings in the area. My clinic treated a puppy this week. Same symptoms as your Scout might have shown. Chet's eyes narrowed. Symptoms? Constricted pupils, indigo-stained gums, severe respiratory distress, Rowan listed carefully. The toxin leaves traces we can track with UV light. Scout's gums were blue? Chet leaned forward, his voice dropping. Thought it was strange, but animal control said I was seeing things. Said he probably ate something bad. They told me the same thing about Button, Nell said softly. But Dr. Keene found evidence of a restricted farm toxin. Someone's using it deliberately near the Gurney development tract. Gurney. Chet spat the name. Been trying to buy up land around here for months, offering pennies on the dollar for prime hunting ground. He stood slowly. You saying he killed my dog? We're saying someone did, Rowan replied carefully. And we need help proving it. Chet studied them both for a long moment. The radio crackled with static beside him, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. His face softened slightly. Scout was all I had left after Marie passed, he said, quietly. 14 years together. Used to ride with me in the bucket truck when I worked the power lines. He cleared his throat. What kind of help you need? Over the next hour, they explained their suspicions and evidence. Chet listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking sharp questions that showed his lineman's attention to detail. When they finished, he disappeared into his garage and returned with a heavy flashlight and detailed maps of the area from his utility days. "Know these woods better than most?" he said, spreading the maps on his porch table. "All the access roads, service paths, places someone might think nobody'd look." Rowan pulled out his modified UV light, a veterinary diagnostic tool he'd adapted with filters to detect the specific dye used in the toxin. "We need to search at night when the fluorescence will be visible. Track where they've been spreading it." "Got my old CB radio too," Chet added. "We can coordinate if we need to split up." His eyes had taken on new life, the bitter grief replaced by focused purpose. They waited until dusk, using the time to plan their search pattern. As the sun set, they drove Rowan's truck down an old logging road, parking well back from their target area. The woods were quiet except for crickets and the occasional rustle of night creatures. "Stay close," Rowan warned, switching on the UV light. "The dye fluoresces bright blue under this wavelength." They moved carefully through the trees, scanning the ground. For the first 20 minutes, they found nothing. Then Nell called out softly, "Here, by this fallen log!" They gathered around where her flashlight beam pointed. Under Rowan's UV light, bright blue streaks glowed on the bark and leaves, unmistakable signs of the poison's path. "They're dragging something," Chet observed, studying the pattern. "Container or sprayer, leaving traces as they go." They followed the toxic trail, documenting everything with Rowan's phone camera. The glowing streaks led them deeper into the woods, eventually connecting to what looked like an old service road. "Wait," Chet whispered, holding up his hand. Through the trees ahead, they could make out the dark shape of a building. A metal sign creaked slightly in the night breeze. "Durney Feed Storage." "The old grain shed," Chet explained softly. "Been abandoned since they built the new facility in town. But look there." Fresh tire tracks cut through the weeds leading to the padlocked door. Under the UV light, blue traces glowed along the path and around the building's foundation. They crouched in the shadows, the weight of their discovery settling over them. This wasn't just random cruelty anymore. The evidence led straight to Durney's door, proof that someone was storing and distributing the poison from his property. "We need to document everything," Rowan whispered, carefully photographing the scene. "The tracks, the traces, the building's location relative to where the dogs were found." "Got the coordinates marked," Chet murmured, checking his old utility GPS unit. "And I know every legal easement and property line in these woods. They can't claim we were trespassing." Nell stared at the old shed, thinking of Button's struggle to survive, of Scout's lonely death, of all the other pets who might have suffered similar fates. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "What's that smell?" she whispered suddenly. A sickly, sweet chemical odor drifted from the building. Rowan's face hardened as he recognized it. "That's it. The toxin. They must be storing it inside." "We should go," Chet said quietly. "Got what we came for. Don't want them catching us here." They backed away carefully, retracing their steps through the woods. The UV light revealed more traces along their path, evidence of multiple trips to and from the shed. Each glowing streak represented another potential victim, another family's heartbreak. When they finally reached Rowan's truck, they were quiet for a moment, processing what they'd found. The night seemed darker somehow, weighted with the knowledge of what was happening in these woods. "What now?" Nell asked softly. "Now we build our case," Rowan replied. "Photos, coordinates, documentation, everything by the book so they can't dismiss it." "I'll help," Chet said firmly. "Whatever you need. For Scout." His voice caught slightly on the name. And for all the others. They drove back in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. But there was a sense of purpose now, a shared determination that hadn't existed before. What had started with one poisoned puppy had led them to something much bigger and much darker than they'd imagined. The evidence was clear. Now they just had to make sure it couldn't be ignored. Something in Nell's gut urged her forward. Despite Chet's warning to leave, she moved closer to the shed, her flashlight beam catching the edge of a broken window. "Nell, wait!" Rowan whispered urgently, following close behind her. "We need to be careful." She found a gap where two boards had pulled away from the wall. Squeezing through, she clicked on her flashlight, its beam cutting through years of dust and cobwebs. The sickly sweet chemical smell was stronger inside, making her eyes water. Stacked against the far wall were dozens of white sacks, labeled Durney Premium Cattle Feed. But something wasn't right about them. The texture seemed off, and the chemical smell definitely wasn't normal feed. Rowan slipped in behind her, immediately tensing when he saw the sacks. He moved closer, examining the fine print on one of the labels. "These aren't feed," he said quietly, voice tight with anger. "Look at these codes, C1080, TETs. These are restricted rodenticides, highly toxic compounds that require special permits. They're disguising it as regular feed to avoid detection." Nell's hand shook as she held the flashlight. "How many animals could this kill?" "Hundreds, maybe thousands." Rowan pulled out his phone, starting to document the evidence. "This is way bigger than we thought. They're not just poisoning strays, they're running an illegal operation." The beam of Nell's flashlight caught something metallic in the corner, spraying equipment and empty containers with the same blue-tinted residue they'd followed through the woods. Suddenly, bright light flooded through the cracks in the walls. Headlights. An engine rumbled outside, followed by the crunch of boots on gravel. Well, look what we got here." Harold Vance's voice boomed through the night air. "Some folks just can't mind their own business." Nell's heart hammered in her chest. Rowan quickly tried to send the photos he'd taken, but before he could, the shed door burst open. Vance stood there, his bulk filling the frame, face twisted in an ugly smile. "Hand over the phone, Doc," he demanded, advancing slowly. Instead, Rowan tried to back away, still working to send the evidence. With surprising speed, Vance lunged forward, knocking the phone from his hands. It clattered to the floor, and Vance's boot came down hard, crushing it. "No witnesses, no evidence," he sneered. "Now you folks are going to learn what happens to nosy troublemakers." Chet appeared in the doorway behind Vance, wielding a thick branch. But Vance was ready, spinning around and catching it mid-swing. The force sent Chet stumbling backward. "Run!" Rowan shouted, shoving Nell toward the gap in the wall. They burst out into the night, with Vance's heavy footfalls close behind. Button, who had been waiting outside, barked sharply and took off through the cornfield. Without hesitation, Nell followed, trusting her dog's instincts. The cornstalks whipped at their faces as they ran, the rustle of their passage drowned out by Vance's crashing pursuit and angry shouts. "Button knows something," Nell gasped as they ran. "He's leading us somewhere." The little dog stayed just ahead, his tail visible in the moonlight as he darted between the rows. Behind them, Vance's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, accompanied by threats and curses. They emerged from the cornfield near a steep embankment. Button ran straight to what looked like a large concrete pipe, a drainage culvert, half hidden by overgrown weeds. Under Rowan's UV light, blue streaks glowed around its entrance. "The poison trail," Rowan panted. "It continues in there." They could hear Vance getting closer, his flashlight beam sweeping the edge of the field. They had seconds to decide. "In here," Chet urged, already crouching to enter the culvert. I know these drainage systems. This one connects to the old creek bed." Button didn't hesitate, darting into the darkness. Nell followed, trying not to think about what might be living in there. Rowan came last, just as Vance's light swept over the embankment. The culvert was cold and damp, the concrete rough under their hands and knees. Water trickled somewhere ahead, and the air smelled of rust and decay. The Yaos crawled forward in total darkness, not daring to use their lights with Vance so close. "Where's this mutt leading us?" Vance's voice echoed from the entrance. "Come on out. Make it easier on yourselves." They froze, barely breathing, as his flashlight beam probed the culvert's mouth. Button, surprisingly, made no sound, as if he understood the need for absolute silence. Minutes stretched by like hours as they waited, muscles cramping in the confined space. Finally, they heard Vance's frustrated curse and the sound of his footsteps moving away. "He'll be back with reinforcements," Chet whispered. "We need to keep moving." In the pitch darkness, Button's warm body pressed against Nell's hand, guiding her forward. The culvert seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth, carrying them away from Vance but toward something else, something Button seemed determined to show them. The chemical smell grew stronger as they crawled deeper into the darkness, mixing with the damp earthiness of the tunnel. Whatever answers lay ahead, they were committed now. There was no going back. They continued forward, their world narrowed to the sound of their own breathing, the feel of cold concrete, and the steady presence of a brave little dog leading them toward the truth. The culvert's darkness pressed around them like a thick blanket as they inched forward on hands and knees. The concrete beneath them was slick with moisture, and the air grew heavier with each yard they crawled. Button's nails clicked softly against the surface, the sound echoing in the confined space. "Wait," Nell whispered, her voice barely audible. "Do you smell that?" The chemical odor had grown stronger, sharp and artificial against the natural mustiness of the tunnel. Rowan fumbled in his pocket for his phone's flashlight, keeping the beam pointed downward to avoid detection from outside. The weak light revealed a sight that made Nell's breath catch. 20 feet ahead, a large metal drum lay on its side, partially submerged in a shallow stream of water. Blue-tinted liquid seeped from its rusted seam, creating an eerie glow where Rowan's UV light caught it. The same indigo shade that had stained Button's gums. "Dear Lord," Chet breathed, his weathered face pale in the dim light. "That's what killed my Lucy." Rowan crawled closer, examining the drum with professional scrutiny. "This is industrial-grade rodenticide," he said, his voice tight with anger. "The concentration is far above legal limits, and look." He pointed to where the contaminated water disappeared into a smaller drainage pipe. "This feeds directly into Copper Creek." Nell's mind raced as she connected the dots. "Copper Creek runs through all the holdout farms," she said. "The ones where people refuse to sell to Durney." "He's poisoning their water supply," Rowan confirmed grimly. "The dead animals were just the beginning. This could make people sick, kill livestock, destroy crops." He shook his head in disgust. "It's not just animal cruelty anymore. This is environmental terrorism." Button whimpered softly, pressing against Nell's leg. She reached down to scratch his ears, remembering how close she'd come to losing him. How many other animals had suffered because of this man's greed? "We need proof," Chet said, his voice stronger now, filled with purpose. "Something that ties this directly to Durney." Rowan was already photographing the drum with his backup phone, making sure to capture the serial number stamped into the metal. "These numbers can be traced," he explained. "Every batch of restricted chemicals has to be logged and accounted for." The beam of his flashlight caught something else, a waterproof clipboard attached to the wall of the culvert. Nell stretched to reach it, her fingers closing around damp paper. Delivery logs, protected from the worst of the moisture by plastic sleeves. Her hands shook as she read the entries. "These are all signed by Durney Feed," she said. "Dates, times, quantities, it's all here. They weren't even trying to hide it." "They never expected anyone to find this place," Rowan said quietly. "They thought they were untouchable." Nell stared at the documents in her hands, feeling the weight of what they represented. Lives destroyed, animals killed, land poisoned, all for profit. All because one man decided his luxury hunting lodge was worth more than an entire community. The chemical smell was making her head spin, but clarity was cutting through her fear. They had the evidence now. They could stop this. "We have to go public," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Not just to the police, they might be in Durney's pocket too. We need to take this to everyone. The media, the EPA, state officials, make it too big to cover up." Rowan nodded, still photographing everything methodically. "We'll need to move fast," he said. "Once Durney realizes we know, he'll try to clean this up." "And shut us up," Chet added grimly. Button suddenly stiffened, his ears pricking forward. In the distance, they could hear voices echoing through the culvert system. Vance had returned, and he wasn't alone. "They're searching the tunnels," Rowan whispered. "We need to move." Nell clutched the delivery logs to her chest, protected inside their plastic sleeves. The evidence felt like it was burning in her hands. Proof of corruption that could bring down one of the most powerful men in the county. Her whole life, she'd kept her head down, accepted what came her way, survived by staying invisible. But looking at Button's trusting eyes in the dim light, she felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about right and wrong, about standing up when it mattered most. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "we have to see this through. We have to make them answer for what they've done." The voices were getting closer. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, Button found another branch in the tunnel system as they crawled forward, following his lead once again. Nell held tight to both her courage and the evidence that could change everything. The time for being invisible was over. Back at the veterinary clinic, Rowan worked methodically, his hands gentle as he checked Button's vital signs. The small brown dog lay quietly on the examination table, his trusting eyes following every movement. "His heartbeat's getting stronger," Rowan said, offering Nell a reassuring smile. "The antidote is working. He's a fighter, this one." Nell touched Button's scarred paw gently. "Just like all of us now," she said softly. Spread across another exam table were copies of the delivery logs, photographs, and water samples they'd collected from the culvert. She'd organized everything into 3 identical folders, one for the state agricultural inspector, one for their own records, and one hidden away as backup. Chet burst through the clinic door, his lineman's cap askew with excitement. "Got the CB radio network fired up," he announced, holding up his battered handheld radio. "Half-dozen retired drivers are helping track Durney's feed trucks. If he tries moving any more poison, we'll know." "Thank you, Chet," Nell said warmly. The old lineman had transformed from a bitter recluse into their most dedicated ally. His knowledge of the county's back roads and old communication networks was proving invaluable. The radio crackled. "Big rig heading north on County Road 12, a gravelly voice reported. "Matches the description." Chet adjusted the dial. "Roger that, keeping eyes on." He turned to Nell and Rowan. "Got 3 more drivers positioned along that route. Durney won't sneeze without us knowing about it." Rowan finished wrapping a fresh bandage around Button's paw. "The agricultural inspector arrives tomorrow morning," he said, But we need more copies of everything, just in case. Nell nodded, gathering up their precious evidence. I can use the copier at the motel. Mrs. Stevens is usually gone by 4 o'clock. She knew using the office equipment without permission could cost her job, but compared to what they were fighting, it seemed a small risk. I'll come with you, Rowan offered, but Nell shook her head. Stay with Button, she insisted. And Chet needs to coordinate the CB network. I can handle this part. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows when Nell slipped into the empty motel office. Her hands trembled slightly as she fed the documents into the copier, page by page. The machine's hum seemed impossibly loud in the quiet space. Through the window, she could see the usual afternoon traffic. Tourists headed to the lake, locals driving home from work. None of them knew about the poison seeping into their water, the corruption eating at their community's heart. Not yet. When she finished, Nell had 5 complete sets of copies. She tucked them carefully into separate manila envelopes, marking each with a small dot in different colors. A coding system she'd devised to track where each set went. One would go home with her, one to Rowan's clinic, one to Chet's house, and 2 to separate safety deposit boxes. We're not letting this disappear, she whispered to herself. Later that evening, back at the clinic, Nell made the call she'd been both dreading and anticipating. She dialed the county clerk's office and left a message requesting to speak at the upcoming zoning board meeting. Her voice remained steady as she stated her name and intention to address environmental concerns about the Durney development project. You're really doing this? Rowan said quietly after she hung up. He was sitting on the floor beside Button's bed, one hand resting protectively on the dog's side. We're really doing this, Nell corrected him. All of us. Chet looked up from his radio. Durney won't take this lying down. He's got friends in high places. That's why we need to make it public, Nell explained. In front of witnesses, cameras, reporters, everyone. Once the truth is out there, they can't bury it again. That night, sleep was elusive. Nell lay in her bed, remembering that terrible morning when she'd found Button barely breathing. She could still feel his little heart fluttering against her chest as she'd rushed him to Rowan's clinic. The memory of his paws wrapping around her neck in what she'd thought was goodbye still brought tears to her eyes. But now that same memory gave her strength. Button had fought to survive, and now she would fight to make sure no one else's beloved pet suffered the same fate. No farmer would lose their livestock to poisoned water. No child would play in a contaminated creek. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Nell arrived at the clinic early, finding Rowan already there, organizing their evidence for the agricultural inspector's visit. Button greeted her with an enthusiastic tail wag, his recovery a daily reminder of why their fight mattered. Chet's voice crackled over the radio. Durney's headed into town. Looks like he's going to his office. Good, Nell said firmly. Let him work on his development plans. Tomorrow at the zoning meeting, everyone will know exactly what those plans cost. She picked up Button, holding him close. His heartbeat was strong now, steady against her chest. No longer the frightened farewell embrace of that first morning, but a rhythm of life, of resilience, of determination. We're ready, she told Rowan and Chet. Whatever happens next, we're ready. The evidence was prepared, their strategy set. Tomorrow, they would step into the light and speak truth to power. But for now, Nell simply held her dog, drawing courage from his unwavering trust and unconditional love. Button had shown her what it meant to fight for survival. Now she would show Durney what it meant to fight for justice. The county meeting hall buzzed with whispered conversations as people filed in for the zoning board meeting. Nell Bishop sat in the third row, her manila poive folder clutched tightly in trembling hands. Dr. Rowan Keene sat beside her, his quiet presence steadying her nerves. Caleb Durney swept in through the double doors, wearing an expensive suit and his trademark confident smile. He nodded to several board members as he took his seat at the front, completely at ease. His composure only strengthened Nell's resolve. When the clerk called her name, Nell stood on shaky legs. The walk to the podium felt endless. She could feel dozens of eyes following her progress, including Durney's calculating stare. "Members of the board," she began, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm here today regarding the Durney Development Project." She pulled out her first photograph and held it up. "This is what's really happening on that land." The image showed the rusted drum in the culvert, blue dye clearly visible against the metal. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as she continued. "This restricted rodenticide is being deliberately dumped into the water supply. The same poison that's killing local dogs and wildlife will contaminate farmland for miles downstream." She laid out the delivery logs next, pointing to highlighted entries. "These records from Durney Feed show systematic delivery of restricted chemicals under falsified labels." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. "This isn't development. It's environmental sabotage designed to force people off their land." The room erupted. Farmers stood up shouting, board members talked over each other, and reporters' cameras flashed. Through it all, Durney remained perfectly still, that same practiced smile on his face. When he finally rose to speak, the room fell silent. "I appreciate Ms. Bishop's creative interpretation of events," he said smoothly. "I look forward to providing a full clarification of these misunderstandings very soon." His eyes met Nell's, and the threat in them was clear as ice. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. The board chairman called for an immediate investigation, while reporters swarmed around both Nell and Durney. Rowan helped her navigate through the crowd and out to the parking lot. "You did it," he said quietly as they drove back to the clinic. "No matter what happens next, the truth is out there now." Neither of them could have predicted just how quickly next would arrive. The call came just after midnight. Nell fumbled for her ringing phone in the darkness. "The clinic's on fire!" Chet's voice was frantic. "I was monitoring the CB when I heard the emergency calls. Rowan's not answering his phone!" Nell was already pulling on clothes as she hung up. She sped through the empty streets, her heart pounding. The glow of flames lit up the night sky long before she reached the clinic. 2 fire trucks were already on scene, their red lights painting everything in hellish colors. The main building was engulfed, flames reaching hungrily through broken windows. And from inside came the sounds that would haunt her forever. The terrified howls and cries of trapped animals. She spotted Rowan's truck in the parking lot just as he burst out of the smoke-filled doorway, coughing but carrying 2 cat carriers. He handed them to a firefighter before turning to go back in. "Rowan, wait." Nell caught up to him. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes wild. "There are still animals inside," he gasped. "I can't leave them." Without hesitation, she said, "I'm coming with you." They plunged into the inferno together. The heat was overwhelming, the smoke so thick she could barely see. They moved by touch and memory, finding cages and carriers, passing animals out to the firefighters who had followed them in with breathing equipment. "The isolation ward," Rowan shouted over the roar of flames. "Button's still in there." They pushed deeper into the burning building. A thunderous crack overhead made them both look up, just as a burning beam broke free. Rowan shoved Nell aside as it crashed down, pinning his leg beneath it. "Go!" he ordered through clenched teeth. "Get out while you can." But Nell was already searching for something to use as a lever. The smoke was getting thicker, making it impossible to see. Then she heard a familiar bark, Weak but determined, Button had wiggled free of his cage. Despite his still recovering strength, he squirmed through the debris until he reached Rowan. Then, incredibly, he grabbed Nell's sleeve in his teeth, pulling her hand to where Rowan's boot was trapped. Together they managed to shift the beam just enough for Rowan to pull free. They stumbled toward the exit as the roof began to give way, Button leading them through the smoke like a tiny guardian angel. They burst out into the night air seconds before the building's roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. Paramedics swarmed them immediately, pressing oxygen masks to their faces. Through the chaos, Nell kept her hand buried in Button's fur, feeling his rapid heartbeat gradually slow to match her own. Most of the animals had been saved, but their evidence, all their carefully gathered proof stored in Rowan's office, was gone. The fire had destroyed everything. As they watched the firefighters battle the last of the flames, Nell felt Rowan's hand find hers. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Both of you." He reached down to scratch Button's ears. "I thought I'd lost everything in there." Nell looked at the burning clinic, then at Button's trusting eyes, and finally at Rowan's soot-stained face. "Not everything," she said firmly. "Not what matters most." The dawn was breaking as the last embers died, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. They had lost their evidence, but they had saved each other. And somehow, Nell knew that would have to be enough for now. Nell sat on her worn couch, running her fingers through Button's fur while Rowan paced nearby. The acrid smell of smoke still clung to their clothes from the clinic fire. Button nudged her hand, and in that moment, something caught her. "Aye." She clicked on her desk lamp and leaned closer. "Rowan," she called softly. "Look at this." He knelt beside them as Nell pulled out her phone's UV light app, something they'd used to track the poison trails before. Under the purple glow, Button's brown fur sparkled with tiny blue specks, remnants of the tracking dye that had nearly killed him. "It's still there," Rowan breathed. "The chemical markers in Durney's poison, they're still in his system." The door creaked open as Chet shuffled in, clutching his ancient CB radio. "Got something you need to hear," he said, adjusting the dial. Through the static, voices crackled. "Thursday, 0400, move the drums." Nell's heart quickened. "That's tomorrow morning." "Durney's getting nervous," Chet explained. "Been monitoring his frequencies. He's clearing out the evidence before anyone else can investigate." Rowan pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Inspector Matthews again. He didn't believe our photos before, but if we can catch Durney in the act." "Tell him to meet us at the culvert," Nell said. 4 a.m. sharp." She looked down at Button, who wagged his tail slowly. "We've got one shot left. This time we'll make them listen." They spent the next hours preparing. Chet monitored the radio chatter while Rowan gathered sample containers and testing supplies salvaged from his burned clinic. Nell mapped out every approach to the culvert, determined not to let Durney slip away again. As the night deepened, her exhaustion warred with determination. The memory of Button's limp body in her arms, of trapped animals crying in the flames, of all the small creatures who had no voice. It hardened something inside her. Her fear was still there, but it had transformed into something stronger. "You should try to rest," Rowan said softly, touching her shoulder. Nell shook her head. "I'll rest when this is done." She checked her watch. 2 hours until dawn. When Durney stopped, Button pressed against her leg, his presence steady and warm. His fur still carried those tiny traces of poison, the last piece of proof they had left. But this time, she thought, it would be enough. It had to be. They gathered their supplies and headed out into the dark, cold morning. The culvert waited ahead, and with it, their final chance at justice. The pre-dawn air bit cold and sharp as Nell, Rowan, and Button crouched behind thick bushes near the culvert. Inspector Matthews and 3 deputies waited silently in their positions, hidden by the darkness and morning mist. The rumble of engines broke the silence. 2 pickup trucks approached, their headlights cutting through the fog. Nell's heart pounded as she recognized Durney's polished black Ford and Vance's mud-splattered Chevy. "Right on schedule," Rowan whispered. They watched as Durney emerged in his pressed shirt and shining boots, looking oddly out of place in the grimy morning light. Vance lumbered out after him, flashlight beam sweeping the area. "Let's make this quick," Durney called out. "Get those drums loaded before what, Mr. Durney?" Inspector Matthews stepped into view, deputies flanking him. "Before someone notices you're disposing of restricted toxins?" Vance's hand shot to his hip holster. The metal of his service weapon gleamed as he drew it. "Back off! This is county business!" Nell didn't think, she acted. The fire extinguisher she'd brought felt heavy in her hands as she burst from the bushes. With all her strength, she swung it low, catching Vance behind the knees. He crashed down hard, his gun skittering across the wet ground. "County business?" she said, standing over him. "Poisoning innocent animals and threatening people's lives isn't county business." The deputies moved in swiftly, cuffing both men. In the growing light, Inspector Matthews photographed the scene. The leaking drums, the soil stained with luminescent blue dye that glowed even in the dawn light. Button pressed against Nell's leg, his tail high and proud. "We've got them," Rowan said softly, squeezing her shoulder. "It's over." Months passed like a healing wound, each day bringing new strength. The community rallied around them, helping Rowan establish a new clinic in a renovated farmhouse just outside town. The waiting room walls, painted a warm yellow, held framed newspaper clippings about Durney's arrest and conviction. On a bright autumn morning, Nell sat at her new desk, intake coordinator, the nameplate read, with Button dozing at her feet. She'd found her voice, and with it, her place in the world. "Nell?" Rowan stood in the doorway, his gray eyes warm. "I was wondering, would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" She looked up at him, this good man who had helped her find her courage, and smiled. Button's tail thumped against the floor as quiet laughter filled the sunlit room, the sound of healing, of hope, of hearts opening to new possibilities. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that very much." Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.